I didn't come here to invest in the family legacy, Dad. I came to repossess it. The silence that followed was heavier than the humid air outside. My brother dropped his fork against the china with a sharp clatter. My mother stopped breathing, her hand freezing halfway to her wine glass. And for the first time in 29 years, my father looked at me with something other than disappointment. He looked at me with genuine fear. To understand why I just nuked my own family's empire over a medium rare ribeye, we have to go back about 48 hours, before the shouting, before the lawyers, before I became the villain in their story. My name is Ethan. I'm 29 years old, and I build AI logistics systems. For years, my family called it playing video games. They told me real men moved concrete and steel, not code. I was the invisible child, the mistake, the nerd who spent too much time in his room. But while they were busy looking down on me, I was building something that was about to swallow their world whole. It all started on a Tuesday. The press release went out at 8 a.m. sharp. Nexus Systems acquired for $140 million. My phone instantly exploded. It vibrated so hard across my desk it nearly fell off. Congratulations poured in from former professors, from venture capitalists who'd rejected me 3 years ago, and from random high school classmates I hadn't spoken to in a decade. Everyone wanted a piece of the glory, to be close to the new money. Everyone, that is, except the 4 people who shared my last name. I sat in my office, looking out at the Seattle skyline, and I scrolled through my messages. Nothing from my father, Arthur, nothing from my mother, Sylvia, nothing from my brothers, Julian or Connor. Just a silence so loud it rattled my teeth. I had just achieved the impossible. I had secured generational wealth, the kind of money that changes the trajectory of a bloodline. They couldn't even be bothered to send a thumbs-up emoji. They just ignored it. Then, at 4:15 p.m., a single text came through from my father. Family dinner. It's the Gilded Oak. 7 p.m. Friday. Important discussion. Do not be late. No congratulations. No, we heard the news. Just a summons. It's like I was a misbehaving employee being called into HR. I stared at that glowing screen until the words blurred. The younger Metha Ethan, who slept on a futon in a basement apartment while coding for 18 hours a day, would have felt hopeful. He would have thought, maybe they want to celebrate me. Maybe this is finally it. But the Ethan sitting in the CEO chair knew better. I felt a cold shift in my chest. This wasn't a celebration. This was a shakedown. They didn't know the specifics of my deal yet, but they smelled blood in the water. They knew I had cash, and they knew I had a weakness, a desperate, pathetic need to be accepted by them. I swiveled my chair around to look at the whiteboard behind me. It was covered in schematics for automated supply chains. You see, my family owned Sterling Logistics, a trucking empire that had been bleeding money for 5 years. Why? They refused to modernize. They refused to listen to me when I told them their routing software was obsolete. They called my work cute. Cute, my father had said at Christmas last year. When you're done with your little computer projects, Ethan, maybe we can find you a job in dispatch. I stood up and reached for my jacket. Not the new Italian wool blazer I'd bought for the press tour. I grabbed the old gray hoodie with the frayed zipper, the one I wore when I was poor, the one they associated with failure. If they wanted a meeting, I would give them one. But I wasn't going to walk in there as the conquering hero they expected to fleece. I was going to walk in as the disappointment they remembered. Underestimation is a powerful weapon. You feed it to your enemies, let them get high on their own superiority, and then, right when they think they have you cornered, you show them the truth. I grabbed my keys knot to the new Porsche in the executive garage. But to the rusted 2014 Civic, I kept for sentimental reasons. I typed back a single word. Okay. I wasn't going to dinner to make peace. I was going to verify a hypothesis. I was going to see if they loved me, or if they just loved what I could provide. And God help them if it was the latter. The drive to the Gilded Oak was a 40-minute exercise in masochism. My 2014 Civic rattled every time I hit 50 miles per hour. A sound I used to associate with poverty, but now sounded strangely like tactical camouflage. The air conditioning had died 3 summers ago, so I drove with the windows down, letting the humidity plaster my hair to my forehead. I wanted to look like I had rushed here at their beck and call. I could have taken the helicopter. I could have taken the G-Wagon. But wealth is a loud signal, and tonight I needed to be static. As I pulled up the winding driveway of the steakhouse, the hierarchy of my life was laid out in sheet metal. Parked in the front row were my father's Range Rover and Julian's Porsche 911. Both were leased, of course. My family treated ownership like an allergy. It preferred the appearance of wealth to the messy reality of equity. I pulled my rusted gray sedan in behind the Porsche. The engine sputtered and died with a pathetic wheeze that turned heads in the valet line. The valet, a kid no older than 19, looked at my car with undisguised contempt. He didn't open my door. He just stood there, clutching a ticket, waiting for me to exit the embarrassment on my own. "Keep it close," I said, handing him the key. "Clutch sticks a little in reverse," he sneered, barely making eye contact. "Right. I'll put it in the back lot, sir. Wouldn't want it to block the flow." "Perfect," I muttered. Walking into the restaurant felt like stepping into a time capsule of bad decisions. The air smelled of truffle oil, aged mahogany, and desperation. It was the kind of place where men in three-piece suits made deals they could unafford to impress women they did unlike. My father had been holding court at table 12 for as long as I could remember. I spotted them immediately. They were a tableau of aggressive perfection. Arthur sat at the head, nursing a scotch, his face flushed with that specific shade of red that suggests high blood pressure and hidden liquidity issues. My mother, Sylvia, was pretending to read the wine list, though I knew she was scanning the room to see who was watching her. And Julian ... Julian was texting, probably checking his crypto portfolio, waiting for a miracle that wasn't coming. I stopped at the edge of the dining room, taking a breath. This was it, the moment of truth. If they smiled because they were happy to see me, I would pay for dinner and leave. If they smiled because they needed me, I would burn the place down. I walked up to the table. "Hey." 3 heads snapped up. The reaction was almost theatrical. "Ethan." My father boomed, his voice too loud for the hushed room, stood up, arms wide, performing the role of the benevolent patriarch. "Look at you, you made it." He hugged me. A stiff, hard pat on the back that felt less like an embrace and more like a frisk. "Hi, Dad," I said, keeping my hands in my pockets. My mother looked me up and down, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second as her eyes landed on my frayed hoodie. "Oh, honey, you look tired. Are you eating? You look so thin." "Work's been busy," I lied. "You know how it is." "In the car," Julian chimed in, swirling his drink. He didn't stand up. I heard that thing rattling from the valet stand. "You retelling me that computer business of yours, cuh, and afford a lease on a C-Class? It's embarrassing, Ethan. Truly." There it was, the jab, the instinctual need to belittle me, to elevate himself. "It gets me from A to B, Julian," I said, pulling out the chair opposite my father. "Not all of us need to drive German engineering to feel important." Julian scoffed, rolling his eyes at my father. "See? He still thinks small. Scarcity mindset." "Enough," Arthur said, though he was smiling. He enjoyed this, his sons fighting for scraps of his approval. "Let's order. We have things to discuss. Big things." The leather chair cool against my back. They were already ordering expensive bottles of Cabernet, ordering the seafood tower, ordering as if the credit card bill wasn't going to be a problem. They looked at me and saw a struggling kid they could manipulate. They had no idea that the struggling kid sitting across from them could buy this entire restaurant chain with the interest his account accrued since breakfast. "So," Sylvia said, clasping her hands together, her eyes glittering with artificial warmth. "Tell us everything. We heard your name was in the papers." "Yeah," I said, picking up the heavy linen napkin. Must be nice," Julian muttered. "Getting 15 minutes of fame for some app?" I smiled. It was a cold, sharp thing. "It's not an app, Julian. It's infrastructure." "Whatever," my father interrupted, leaning in, his elbows hitting the table. The pleasantries were over. The shark was starting to circle. "The point is, you have some momentum. And the family. Well, the family is ready to let you in on the ground floor of the next phase." I felt the trap snap shut. They didn't care about my news. They just wanted to leverage it. "I'm listening," I said softly. The seafood tower arrived like a monument to excess. Oysters, lobster tails, jumbo prawns. It was enough food to feed a family of 4 for a week. Sitting on a bed of crushed ice that was melting almost as fast as their composure, I watched my father dissect a lobster tail with surgical precision. He was stalling. I knew his tells better than anyone. When Arthur was confident, he ate quickly. When he was nervous, he played with his food. So he began, not looking up. Let's talk brass tacks. We know you've had a windfall. Windfall? I repeated. Is that what we're calling 3 years of 80-hour weeks? Don't be sensitive, Julian snapped, his mouth full. Dad's trying to compliment you. You got lucky, it happens. The point, my mother interjected, placing a hand on my forearm, is that we are so proud of you. We think it's time you finally took a serious role in the family business. Sterling Logistics is evolving, Ethan. We're moving into automated warehousing. I almost choked on my water. Automated warehousing. That was exactly what I had pitched them 4 years ago. The same pitch they had laughed out of the boardroom. Automated warehousing, I said, keeping my face neutral. It sounds expensive. It requires capital, Arthur admitted, finally looking me in the eye. We've secured the real estate. We have the permits, but the banks. While traditional lenders move too slowly for the speed at which we operate, we need agility. Agility, I said. We need a bridge loan, Arthur said. The words came out fast, like he was ripping off a Band-Aid. $2 million. Just for 6 months. We'll pay you 10% interest. That's better than the market, Ethan. It's a guaranteed return. $2 million. They were asking for pennies compared to what I had just made. But to them, they probably thought they were asking for my entire net worth. They thought they were doing me a favor by letting me buy in. $2 million, I said slowly. And this is for expansion? Strictly expansion, Julian said, leaning back. We're doubling our footprint. We're going to crush the competition. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the way Arthur's collar was slightly too tight, a vein throbbing in his neck. I saw the way Sylvia was shredding her cocktail napkin under the table. I saw the way Julian kept checking the entrance, as if he was afraid someone was going to walk in and repossess his watch. They weren't expanding. They were drowning. I paused, taking a sip of wine. I want to know what you guys think. Was I being too harsh here? Was I wrong to let them sweat, knowing what I knew? Tell me in the comments. That's a lot of money, Dad, I said, putting the glass down. If the business is doing so well, why not just use cash flow? Liquidity crunch, Arthur said quickly. Too quickly. It's all tied up in assets. You know how it is. Rich on paper, cash poor for the moment. And you want me to write a check tonight? We have the papers prepared, Sylvia said, reaching into her oversized designer bag. She pulled out a thick folder. It's a standard loan agreement. Julian had legal draw it up. We just need a signature and we can wire the funds Monday. We pushed the folder across the tablecloth. It slid over the untouched oysters and landed in front of me. I didn't open it. I just rested my hand on the cover. You know, I said softly, it's funny. When I asked you for $5,000 to buy my first server stack, you told me that struggle builds character. You told me that handing me money would cripple my ambition. This is different, Julian spat. This is business. We're offering you a seat at the table. Do you want to be part of this family or not? Part of the family, I mused. Is that what this costs? $2 million? It's an investment. Arthur slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. Don't you dare twist this. We offered you an opportunity because you're finally in a position to help. Carried you for years, Ethan. We put a roof over your head. We paid for that state college degree you barely used. You owe us. I owe you, I repeated. Yes, Sylvia said, her eyes welling up with practiced tears. We're a family, Ethan. We help each other. We lift each other up. It was a masterclass in manipulation. It's guilt, anger, obligation, love bombing, all wrapped up in a business pitch. If I hadn't done my homework, if I was just the lonely son desperate for Daddy's approval, I would have signed that paper. I would have written the check just to make them smile. But I had done my homework. You're right, I said, picking up the folder. Families should be transparent with each other. I opened the folder. The contract was a joke, unsecured, no collateral, no maturation date. It wasn't a loan, it was a donation. So I said, closing the folder, you're building a new warehouse and where was it, Tacoma? Yes, Arthur said, exhaling. He thought he had me. Prime location, near the port. That's interesting, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Because I drove past your Tacoma facility this morning and it didn't look like a construction site. The table went still. It looked, I continued, like it had a foreclosure notice taped to the front gate. Arthur's face went from red to a terrifying shade of gray. Julian froze, his wine glass halfway to his mouth. I didn't come here to invest, Dad, I said, leaning forward. I didn't come here to argue. I reached into my backpack, the tattered one ID brought with me on, pulled out a folder of my own. It was blue, heavy. Came here to show you what actual due diligence looks like. Foreclosure. Julian laughed, but it was a brittle, high-pitched sound. You don't know what you're talking about. It's a misunderstanding with the bank. A clerical error. A clerical error. I opened my blue folder. Is that what we're calling 3 missed mortgage payments, 7 pending lawsuits from unpaid vendors, and 12 separate OSHA violations for unsafe working conditions? I slid the papers across the table. They fanned out like a winning poker hand. I pulled the public records, Dad. Sterling Logistics isn't expanding. It's insolvent. You're not building a warehouse in Tacoma. You're about to lose the one you already have. Arthur stared at the documents. His hands were shaking. Didn't touch them. He knew what they were. You audited us, Sylvia whispered, looking at me like I had pulled a knife. Your own family. I did due diligence, I corrected. Something you taught me never to skip. I came here asking for $2 million. I needed to know where it was going. And it looks like it was going to go straight into a black hole of debt just to keep the lights on for another month. You ungrateful little Arthur started to rise, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. We are protecting this family's legacy. We are doing what we have to do to survive. You sit there, with your new money, judging us? I'm not judging you, I said calmly. I'm assessing risk. And right now, you're a bad investment. Then leave, Julian shouted, slamming his hand down. If you're not going to help, get the hell out. Take your Honda and go back to your basement. We'll find money elsewhere. We have investors lined up. No, I said. You don't. I called them, Julian. I called the bank. Called the private equity firm you were courting last week. They all passed. You're radioactive. The room was silent now. The other diners were staring. The waiter hovered nervously near the kitchen door. You have no right, Arthur hissed. This is my company, my life. Actually, I said, checking my watch. That's the other thing we need to discuss. I turned slightly in my chair and nodded toward the entrance. The heavy oak doors swung open. A woman walked in. She wasn't a waitress. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than Julian's car. She carried a sleek leather briefcase and walked with the kind of precision that makes people nervous. Who is that? Sylvia asked, her voice trembling. That's Sarah, I said. My general counsel. Sarah didn't look at them. She walked straight to my side, opened her briefcase, and placed a single, thick document on top of the pile of evidence I'd already laid out. It's done, Sarah said quietly. The transfer was finalized at 4:55 p.m. Transfer. Arthur looked between me and Sarah. Transfer of what? I placed my hand on the document. Your debt, I said. Arthur blinked. What? The bank was tired of chasing you, Dad. They were preparing to auction off your assets next week. They just wanted to cut their losses, so I made them an offer. I slid the final document toward him. I bought your debt, Arthur. All of it. The mortgages, the credit lines, the outstanding loans. I bought the note for 60 cents on the dollar. I leaned in closer. I'm not your investor. I'm your creditor. Which means technically, I own you. Arthur looked down at the paper. It was a transfer of lien. His name was at the bottom. My holding company's name was at the top. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. Julian sat back, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Sylvia just started to cry soft, terrified sobs. You can't do this, Julian stammered. Can't just buy our company. I didn't buy the company, I said coldly. I bought the leverage. And unlike the bank, I don't care about quarterly projections. I care about competence. And looking at this table, I don't see any. Rose, my father whispered, using my mother's name by mistake, his mind clearly fracturing under the stress. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Ethan, son, why? Because you were going to burn it all down, I said. Because for once in my life, I wanted to be the one holding the steering wheel. I stood up. Sarah stepped back to let me pass. Now, I said, buttoning my cheap gray hoodie over my shirt, we're going to talk about the terms of your surrender? Surrender. Arthur's voice cracked. You're talking like we're at war. We are, I said, my voice steady. You declared at the moment. You decided my success was only valuable if it could pay for your failures. Sarah stepped forward and placed 3 envelopes on the table. One for Arthur, one for Sylvia, one for Julian. They sat there on the white tablecloth like invitations to a funeral. Inside those envelopes, I said, is a severance agreement. Severance. Julian scoffed, though he didn't reach for his envelope. You can't fire us. We built this company. You inherited this company, I corrected. Then you drove it into the ground. As the primary creditor, I have the right to restructure management, and my first act is a complete executive overhaul. Arthur stared at the envelope. He looked old suddenly. The bluster, the rage, the arrogance, it had all evaporated, leaving behind a frightened old man in a suit he couldn't afford. You're taking the company, Arthur whispered. I'm liquidating the company, I said. The brand is toxic. The assets are depreciating. I'm going to sell off the fleet, pay off the vendors you stiffed, and shut down operations before you hurt anyone else. But that's our legacy, Sylvia wept. That's 40 years of work. It's 40 years of ego, I said, and it ends tonight. I pointed to the envelopes, but I'm not a monster. Inside those envelopes is a check, $200,000 each. It's not a payout. It's a buyout. You sign the papers, you resign from the board, and you walk away. Debt-free. You get to keep the house. Dad, you get to keep the lease on the Porsche, Julian. But you never ask me for a cent again. The silence stretched out, thin and brittle. And if we don't sign? Arthur asked, his eyes hard. Then I call the bank back, I said simply. I dissolved the debt purchase. I let them foreclose on Tuesday. You lose the house, you lose the cars, you lose the club membership, you go bankrupt, publicly and painfully. It wasn't a threat, it was math. They knew it. Julian was the first to break. He snatched up the envelope, tore it open, and looked at the check. The greed in his eyes fought with the humiliation, and the greed won. He pulled a pen from his jacket and signed the document without looking at me. Sylvia followed. She didn't look at the check. She just signed it, tears dripping onto the paper, playing the victim until the very end. Arthur was the last. He looked at me, searching for the scared little boy he used to bully into submission. He didn't find him. You're a cold son of a bitch, Ethan, he said quietly. I learned from the best, I replied. He signed. Sarah collected the papers and the checks. I'll file these in the morning, she said, closing her briefcase. Good, I said. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't wait for a hug or a reconciliation that wasn't coming. I turned my back on the table, on the uneaten seafood tower, on the people who shared my DNA but not my life. Walking out of that restaurant felt like taking off a backpack filled with bricks. The air outside was cool and clean. The humidity had broken. I walked past the row of luxury cars, the Range Rovers, and the Porsches, and found my beat-up Civic in the back lot. The valet handed me the keys with a smirk, still judging me by the rust on the fender. Have a good night, he muttered sarcastically. I smiled at him. A real smile this time. I'm having a great night, I said. I got in, cranked the engine, and listened to it rattle. It wasn't a pretty sound, but it was the sound of freedom. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat. I glanced at it. A text from my father. We're still family. Don't forget that. I looked at the message. Then I opened the settings, tapped his contact, and hit block. Then Mom, then Julian. They always told me family was forever. Sometimes forever is just the length of time you allow people to hurt you. I put the car in gear and drove away, leaving the gilded oak and everything it represented in the rearview mirror. I had paid a high price for my freedom, $600,000, and the death of a dream I had held since childhood. But as I merged onto the highway, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold, I realized something. It was the best investment I ever made. If you've ever had to choose your sanity over your bloodline, hit that subscribe button. It's time for some karma.